Welcome to Ask the Hiring Manager. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ask the Hiring Manager. Who wants to make more money? I have a guest here today who's going to help you maximize your earnings during your job search, and that guest is John Gates. John Gates is an author and founder of Salary Coach, where he helps C-suite executives and senior leaders negotiate higher compensation packages without risking their job offers or future relationships. John's unique approach, born from his extensive experience in corporate recruiting, consistently helps his clients secure 10 to 20% more in their pay packages, even in challenging job markets. John's journey began when a sudden job loss led him to a low-paying role at a temporary agency, struggling to support his young family. The turning point came when he realized the power of leverage during his own salary negotiation, securing a substantial offer from Capital One despite initial fears. Through his journey, John developed a unique approach to help senior level professionals navigate salary. John, it's so great having you here. This is a very popular topic that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are interested in learning more about. So I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Leslie. As you know, I'm really passionate about this topic, so I'm grateful to be on and enjoy watching the previous episodes of your podcast. So thanks for including me.
Oh, and thank you for your support. You mentioned to me before in our conversations that the low-paying role you previously had was less than 20,000 a year, I believe.
Yep,
Wow. How did you go
16,000. It's hard to imagine
16,000?
that today. Yeah, that was the base salary that I had just out of
Oh my
college.
gosh, that's incredible slash incredibly crazy. How did you go from this 16,000 very low paid salary to helping executives land $1 million deals?
Well, it's a long journey, actually. I've had a career of over 30 years in corporate talent acquisition. And it starts off, though, with going to college. And I wanted to be a financial analyst in college. I actually got 2 degrees, one in business management and one in finance. And so I applied and got accepted to a high-tech company in Portland, Oregon area, which is where I lived at the time. 3 weeks before I was supposed to start that job, though, I got a letter from them saying they were rescinding all the job offers to every candidate that was still outstanding. And it was a real shock. Like, I had a newborn son at the time, young family. It was a desperate situation. The economy in the Pacific Northwest, where I lived, was very, very bad at the time. And I thought, well, what's going to happen to me now? So I went on a full court press trying to find something up, almost anything that I could do that would pay the bills and avoid having my car repossessed and all that stuff that a poor college student has to deal with. So I ended up getting a job working for a temp agency, and they hired me for 3 reasons. One is I had a business degree. The second is I could speak Spanish. And the third is I looked good in a suit. That was it. And so they hired me to work in a Hispanic suburb of Portland, Oregon, and I was to translate all the employment documents and interview and dispatch temporary employees that spoke Spanish but not English. It was a brand new labor pool at the time, and they were excited to make that work. So I discovered by accident that I was really good at recruiting. And I think recruiting is a career that a lot of people fall into by accident. Most people don't start their career thinking, I'm going to be a recruiter. It just sort of happens for most people. And so I worked for temp agencies for about 5 years, and I was really struggling financially. That first job paid me $16,000 a year, and I was poor, like so poor that I had a flat tire as my spare. And I knew that if one of my other four tires on my 71 Volkswagen Super Beetle went flat, that I was going to be in a world of hurt. I wouldn't be able to get to work. I couldn't afford to buy a used tire. I was that poor. So after 5 years of struggle, I finally got a job working for a company called Tektronix, which is a high-tech manufacturing company, as a technical recruiter. And they were a fairly large company. And for the first time in my life, I remember feeling a little breathing room financially. So I was doing okay and starting to pay off debts. Well, 3 years in, I got laid off because their marketing department made some dreadful mistakes and brought a whole generation of products that were mismatched to market. So they ended up laying off about 5 or 6 thousand people. I was one of those. And because I'd only been there for 3 years, the severance was really thin. And here I am back to worrying again that how am I going to pay for my car? Am I going to lose my house? How am I going to feed my young family? By this time, I had 2 young children. So I cast the resume to the four winds just to see where it would land. The local economy was still struggling. So I started to get out of state interviews. And I realized right away I was getting all the questions that I usually ask, which is, hey John, what's your salary requirement? What's the lowest that you will take in order to relocate to Louisiana? Questions like this. And while I asked those questions every single day, I was really poorly prepared to answer them. But my break finally came when I interviewed with Capital One, which is a credit card company headquartered in Virginia. They liked what I had to say and liked my experience in technical recruiting. So I went out there to be an IT recruiter or to interview for that job. And they had the worst, most difficult selection process I'd ever seen, Leslie. They had 20 different behavioral competencies that they were assessing during the interview
Wow.
process. And if you failed one of those, you were out. If you passed 19 and failed one, no offer. They had me take 3 different tests, psychometric tests, logic and reasoning, quant stuff, all this psychometric testing. And if you failed one of those tests, they had hard cut scores. You were not getting an offer. There were no exceptions.
Wow.
And then they had me do a business case interview, which is like a whiteboard exercise. This is where you walk up and they give you some numbers and have you do a bunch of calculations on a whiteboard with no calculator, defend your decisions based on what you're coming up with, make recommendations. And if you failed that, you were out. So they wanted the top 10% of people. And here's where the light bulb really came on for me. After that round of interviews, I had the recruiter come in. His name was Chip, and he sat down and he said, John, I'm going to level with you here. I've interviewed a couple of dozen candidates for this, and only 2 have passed the process. You're one of them, and the other guy just withdrew. So,
Wow.
what's it going to take to get a yes out of you so I can go back to the hiring manager and tell him that you're committed to moving to Virginia?
Hmm.
And he virtually wrote me a blank check. Like I suddenly realized that I had tons of leverage that I didn't know that I had. And so I asked for a $10,000 increase in the salary. I was able to move up to a different bonus tier, which is a huge thing in Capital One. That's a lot of extra money
Wow.
annually. Um, got a signing bonus to cover miscellaneous moving expenses. And then I got a relocation plan that is usually reserved for senior level people. So it had a bunch of bells and whistles in it. And he said yes immediately. And so I spent the next 3 years working at Capital One, wondering if I'd left money on the table there. I had a successful
Mhm.
negotiation. I got a lot of extra money out of it. But man, I thought they said yes too fast. I wonder if I could have got 20,000 more or something like that somehow. But I didn't at that time know how to explore safely whether that was available. So
Sure.
I started paying attention. I started actually tracking as a recruiter the offers that I was extending and when I was able to close below the max that I had authorized. And I would consider this to be negotiation savings. So during that time, I set a goal to pay for my own salary every month with negotiation savings, my annual salary. And I was able to achieve that multiple times to the point where it got my boss's attention and they started asking me to train other recruiters
Oh,
on
wow.
how to negotiate with candidates. And the idea is not to, twist a candidate down to the level of pain. The idea is to find the lowest point that's perceived by the candidate as a win and still a win for the company. So I started tracking all this stuff. And then later on, friends and family started coming to me and saying, oh, I'm in a job search. Could you help me negotiate my deal? And I started doing that for my inner circle, people that, you help people for free. I help people for free. These are our close friends, our inner circle folks. And I started discovering that they were getting much better offers after listening to me and following my
Oh, that's
advice.
great.
Eventually, I decided, well, maybe I should I wonder if I could help people that I don't know, people that don't know me. And so a few years ago, I did this pilot program. I reached out to people on LinkedIn and said, I'm looking for 10 salaried job seekers who would like advice on how to negotiate pay. I will help you for free. I just want to see if I can make a difference in your life.
Hmm.
And well, it turned out that 10 out of 10 of those got better offers as a result of working with me. The lowest was 10,000 extra, the highest was in the 50,000 range.
Wow.
And I thought, this could work. Maybe I could help people make a big difference here. Pay negotiation is a level, it's a stressful thing. Most people avoid that stress. They don't want to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with it. And as a result, I think most people leave big money on the table.
Hmm.
So eventually I started working with mid-career people and then worked my way up to senior people. The biggest success I've had recently was a chief operating officer moving from one company to another. And the total pay adjustment that we got together working together on his package was $613,000. So that's not his total package. That's how much more he made working through a negotiation with me.
Wow.
And that's just, even I didn't know that that was possible. But if all the stars align and the situation is correct and all the winds are blowing in your direction, you can get that kind of money. This is probably a good place for me to say there's a disclaimer here. Past performance is not the perfect indicator of future performance. If you're making $200,000 a year, please don't think that I can make you an extra 600,000 on top of that.
Sure.
But if you're making $200,000 a year, you might be able to make an extra 20, 30, 40,000. People leave that kind of money on the table all the time. So that's a long-winded answer. Hope it helps, but that's the journey that I've gone through.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love hearing your background. Very interesting from Capital One, the fact that you were as the person who hired you or was a big part of that hiring process mentioned the fact that you passed, all of those exams and that was amazing. So I can understand how at the time you were probably thrilled. And along the way, you learned so much more about the negotiations and the fact that you were starting to help people that you knew, as well
Mm.
as going to people that you help people that you did not know as well. So that's
Mm.
wonderful. You kind of hit on this briefly, but I'm curious. I think I know the answer to this, but from your experience, are most people proactive about pay negotiation or do most shy away from it?
I think most people shy away from it, Leslie. In my experience, if salary wasn't a topic at all, I think people would be very happy about that. Most candidates hate the fact that companies don't disclose their salary, their pay. I think most people are so stressed out by this conversation that they would rather know upfront what the job is going to pay down to the penny.
Right.
They would like to avoid the conversation, and that's because the stakes are very high for most people. And they know that if they answer questions about pay wrong, that they'll be screened out. They won't have a chance to make the case for themselves, or they might waste a lot of time dealing with a company that's just going to lowball them in the end. So,
Sure.
yeah, I think most people are shy about this. There are a few people who are comfortable, but I think most people are would rather avoid the conversation completely.
Yes, that, and I'm curious too, like on that wavelength, what percentage of candidates do you feel aren't negotiating properly and are leaving money on the table?
I think that number is at least 80%
Wow.
based on the metrics that I tracked before when I was tracking how I was able to close lower than what was previously approved. So 80% of salary job seekers, I'm not talking about hourly folks, but once you're salaried, um, a lot of things are negotiable, not just salary. And there is a lot that you can get. 10% are probably getting the best and final offer from a company. There are a few companies that have a we don't negotiate sort of stance.
Hmm.
We make our best and final offer. And the other 10%, I think, are negotiating effectively, maybe not optimally, but effectively.
Very interesting. But like you mentioned, I think you said 80% that are
Mm.
probably That's a big number. It's a
It
huge,
is.
huge number. I'm sure this next one could be a complex answer, but how can a person get what a company is willing to offer without putting their offer at risk without putting the company's offer at risk?
Yeah, I think that is the $1 million question and literally $1 million question in some cases. Um, I think there are a few things to say here. I think most people view negotiation as a confrontation,
Hmm.
and confrontation or ultimatums are filled with yes, no paths. So if you say, I want an extra $100,000 or I'm walking, that's a $100,000 ultimatum. And they have the option of saying, well, goodbye now.
Right.
So you want to avoid those kind of ultimatums and instead explore what's possible. So you do this by asking a series of questions. This is how I coach my clients to operate through this. Once you get an offer, don't accept it immediately. Instead, start asking questions. Ask questions like, when is the first pay raise going to be available? And is my first raise going to be prorated? You ask a series of questions. Asking questions is not going to get your offer yanked. But by asking the right questions at the right time, you can expose that the offer has some weak spots or maybe some potential to move. You just have to know what questions to ask and when. And this is a core part of the consulting engagement that I have with my clients. I teach them what questions to ask based on their interactions so far, based on the offer that they just received. We're asking questions about benefits, pay policy, even severance.
Hmm.
This is something most people don't realize is that the executive level, severance is often negotiable, but you have to, it's very, very tricky. You have to ask at the right time and in the right way, or you'll be perceived as somebody with one foot out the door already. It's kind of like
Just
if you
yes.
are if you are getting serious about dating someone and then you pop the marriage question, and then 3 days before the wedding, you're talking about a prenuptial agreement.
Right.
It's
Right.
it's
Right.
a real
Right.
it could be a real turn off, in terms of what's going on. You want the momentum to move forward and not derail. So the question was, how do you do this without putting the offer at risk? I think the answer is collaboration. You collaborate with the people on the other side. They want you to say yes. They want you to say yes. They're at the point where they've selected you. They want you to say yes, and you want to say yes. So collaborating with them instead of proposing a harsh ultimatum
Right.
is the way to do it. And as a coach, I teach my folks very carefully how to do this in their own personality and in their own words.
Yes. No, that's wonderful. And I love that you mentioned that the difference between the ultimatum, the hard and fast stop or ultimatum, and the collaboration or discussion, same concept. I tend to ask tons of questions. And that's because I like to be informed. And I would think the hiring manager or whoever's being asked these questions also, I would think, would have a certain level of more respect for a prospect who's making sure they're as well as formed as possible and right and not just settling on the first thing that they hear.
Yes, and I'll add this. When they extend an offer to you, they prefer that you will say yes immediately.
Hmm.
That's what they're looking
Okay.
for. And
Right.
recruiters will often pressure you or try to close you immediately just so
Sure.
they can tick the box and put that one away and start working on the other one. They want to go back to the hiring manager with good news.
Yes.
That's what they want. They certainly don't want to get a no, but they want a yes right now. But I want to reassure everybody that's watching right now, if you get an offer, it is okay for you to ask questions. That I know that you might be in a desperate situation where you have to get this. Maybe that offer is just good enough and you're not going to rock the boat. You will not rock the boat by asking a few questions. That is perfectly normal. It happens every day in the lives of recruiters, HR people, and hiring managers. They want to make sure that every question is answered. And if you approach it in the right way, you will not have your offer rescinded at this point just by asking questions. You know what? I'll go even further and say if you ask questions and as a result of that, you lose the offer, imagine what it'd be like working for such a company.
Right.
You might have just dodged a bullet. But this is why I say most candidates will play it very, very safe. The stakes are really high and they don't know where the landmines are hidden. So because of they don't know how to do this, they will often take that very safe path. They'll accept the offer immediately without asking questions and leave a pile of money on the table because of that.
Mm. Yes, I like what you mentioned too about um, asking questions in general, and also, right, it being a reassuring decision, even if it didn't work out, but feeling like you can be an informed consumer. I'm really big on
Mhm.
that. But I also find it interesting your perspective, even from recruiters, wanting to hear that, yes, so that they can satisfy the hiring manager, move on about their business. But I think it's really great. The advice that you're giving to our audience members and job seekers that it is okay to ask questions in a collaborative, in the right manner, of course. So
Yes.
great. Would you say it's harder for clients who are perceived as nice or unconfrontational to be able to negotiate effectively, or is this a misperception?
Well, I think it's a misperception, but I think that people who are naturally nice people who don't like the idea of confrontation, they limit themselves psychologically in this process. So if that's you and you're thinking like negotiation is high confrontation, high risk, that's not me, therefore I'm not going to do it. Be careful because you just pushed yourself into that 80% bucket of people who
Mhm.
are leaving money on the table. Now, most of my clients are really nice people, and I think that there's a misconception about negotiation, salary negotiation. If you Google this, if you go out and you Google salary negotiation techniques or how can I negotiate my salary, the answers you're going to get from so-called experts are things like know your worth and stand up for yourself. And you're nodding, so you probably heard
Yes,
that like
100%.
many times from, but they never really tell you how to know your worth and how to stand up for yourself. And so the perception is, well, okay, I've got to strap on some armor. I'm going to walk into an arena. I'm going to cross swords with somebody, and it's a duel to the death. Like that's how most people view salary negotiation as this high stakes duel to the death sort of deal. So nice people naturally, if they think that is what negotiation is, they withdraw from the idea of it.
Hmm.
So instead, imagine negotiation being a collaboration between nice people. You want something, I want something. Let's find the place where we both win. You can absolutely be a nice person and still get everything that they have on the table. You just have to know how to use your nice person personality to open the conversation. The nice people are really good at engaging folks in conversation and just having an open chat about what's possible is you're halfway there already.
I'm glad that you mentioned that about, being nice people being usually more engaging, but also kind of having that strategic hat on and
Yeah.
balancing both aspects. Yes, as what is that saying? You draw more flies with honey or something like
Yeah, yeah. One of my
that.
recent clients was a director for a hospital system, and he'd just been laid off. The CEO came in and said, "Well, we're going to have to make some huge financial adjustments to survive as a system." And unfortunately, and he got the unfortunately message, right?
Oh.
He'd been working for them for 25 years, very
Mm.
successfully too. He was just like red ink on a financial report somewhere.
Mm.
And so, like so many people, he found himself on the outs. But he was honestly one of the nicest people I've ever met. Super, super nice guy. And so I worked with him carefully and told him how to talk about money at every single step in a non-confrontational way, a
Mm.
collaborative way. And at the end, he got a better salary, he got a signing bonus. Um, it was really good. And oftentimes people who find themselves in between feel a sense of desperation.
Sure.
They they feel like I'm on the outs. How can I off like I'm gonna have to take whatever's offered. And that was
Right.
his starting mental position. So we had some work to do together before he felt like he could do this. But just knowing what to say and how to say it is a huge step forward for most people. And to be able to see the landmines before you step on them is good too.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice for many different areas, let alone the salary negotiation
Mhm.
or job application process too. Would you say there is less or more negotiation latitude for newly created positions within a company?
I think there is a lot more, generally speaking. So I've been the head of global recruiting for multiple Fortune 500s now. And I will say this, when a manager comes to me and says, I have a newly created role, it usually will go through a grading process with most larger companies. They'll have a compensation person look at the job description and say, well, this is grade 19 based on the requirements of the job and all that. Now, we then go out to market and we start talking to candidates, and very often we find that what we think it should be and what it actually is in the market are very different. We need to pay more in order to fill this particular job. We missed the mark on this. And so once once you've been selected as a candidate for a newly created position like this, sometimes they will move the grade of the position or the comp vision for the position around to accommodate the desired candidate at the end. And but they have to justify it internally. They'll have to go back to the compensation team or whoever approved that comp package to begin with, and they'll say, you know what, we interviewed some people. Here's the person that we want. Um, Here are all the things they're going to be able to do for us financially. They're going to avoid these expenses. They're going to bring this revenue. I think we undershot it a little bit. And so since there's only one of these in the whole company, they're not necessarily calibrating against other positions or other people as strongly as you might think. There's a lot of latitude on a newly created position. The hiring manager just needs the ammunition to go defend an adjustment.
Mhm.
And you're going to have to give them that ammunition during the interview process. You're going to have to prove that you're worth more. And that's a big part of what I do in my coaching practice is I help people to come to the table appearing like they're worth more,
Hmm.
showing that they're worth more, demonstrating that. If somebody wants you bad enough, they'll go to bat for you. And it's a political battle that
That's
the
the
hiring
truth.
manager has to do. So I'm in a unique position where I've seen all this stuff happen from the other side of the table. I know the politics of what's about to happen and what you have to say or give to a hiring manager in order to help them fight that political battle and get it done.
Absolutely. And that's great because you have that aspect from both sides, negotiating on the kind of on the client side and the company side, and then also the client side. So that's a great value add, very comprehensive look too, which I'm sure is extremely valuable for those who you help. Yes. And I'm curious, I know we've talked about salary negotiation and its benefits. When does the salary negotiation process actually begin?
That is a really good question. I actually put that out as a poll on LinkedIn
I remember.
maybe 8, 9 months ago as I was writing my book. I was curious about this. because I kept seeing people say on LinkedIn, salary negotiation doesn't begin until you have an offer to negotiate.
Hmm.
And while that might make sense to some people, it never made sense to me. And I'll tell you why. I often have people come to me and they say, John, help, I got a lowball offer. What can I do to make it better? And it's possible to make a lowball offer better. But the way I kind of describe this is like, okay, you have that Volkswagen Super Beetle that I just used to have when I was young. They offered you a Volkswagen Super Beetle and you want a Mercedes. We might be able to put some nicer wheels and a new engine and a new paint job on the Volkswagen Super Beetle, but we're probably not going to get you the Mercedes at this stage. Why is that? It's because it's because they made certain mistakes negotiating earlier in the process.
Hmm.
They didn't, they sold themselves as a person who's in a certain bracket when they want to be at a higher bracket. Now that that decision is made that they're in the lower bracket, you're not going to move to the higher bracket. It's that decision's already been made. That,
Yes.
so we're modifying the offer. We're not putting you in a higher bracket at this point. So when does negotiation start? It starts from the very first conversation about pay. And that can be in the application, in the job application itself. There's usually a box that says, what's your salary requirement? You have to put a number in that box. And that usually, runs blood a little bit cold for most people because they
Yeah.
know it's a screening question.
Yeah.
And then in the phone screen, when somebody calls you and says, "Hey, we like your resume, we like your application. Now let's talk for 30 minutes about your experience." They'll bring up pay again in that conversation. This is your one chance to reframe into something like a range.
Hmm.
And if you don't do that, or you avoid the conversation like so many people will do, if they don't bring it up, you have to. If you don't do any of that, they'll assume that they can hire you for what you put in the application. That's a huge
Yes.
mistake. So I think people can make a series of mistakes along the way before the offer is made,
Hmm.
that can create a lowball offer for them, or an offer that's in a lower bracket than they would want. So you have to start off in the application, build through the phone screen, build a lot more during the interview process, and you're building momentum and leverage through this whole thing. And at the end, you're going to get hopefully the best offer that they can make. But if
Yeah.
not, we'll see if we can tweak that some with a counter offer that's appropriate.
Absolutely. No, it's very fascinating, especially with what you're saying about that, I say dreaded question, but that recurring question dreaded for some, I'm sure, about the
Mhm.
salary requirements, because as you've seen many, many, many times, there's that battle, I'm sure, within a job applicant of like, oh, I don't want to go too low for the applicant standards, but I also don't want to be screened out, you know? So that's interesting what you mentioned about the range as well.
Yeah, yeah. In this economy too, the economy feels quite soft for some sectors. And when you feel that as a job applicant, you're applying and you're applying and you're getting phone screens, but you're not advancing to the interview process. If you become desperate, you will short sheet your own bed just so that you can get an interview. And you know that you have to have a hiring team fall in love with you in order to get an offer. You know you need an offer. So what do? Quite often, people will say, they'll create this low level of financial expectation just so that they can get the chance to interview. And it's important to land the interview, but it's also important not to sabotage yourself at the phone screen just to get the interview. And there's a way to do that, very specific, couple of techniques that I teach my clients:
Hmm.
how to bypass that phone interview to get the interview and meet the hiring team. It's in that phone interview stage, Leslie, I'll say this: it's really easy for a recruiter to just put you in the no stack at
Hmm.
this point. You haven't met anybody else. It becomes much harder for them to do that once you've met the hiring manager and the team, or once they've seen your resume. Because now there are other voices in the mix, other people that say,
True,
no, we want to interview this person.
true. One thing you mentioned too is desperation. So I know that that is especially when applying for and the thought of even negotiating for salary, it's a critical emotion, can make or break a person's perception of us. And I'm sure, as you would agree, affect our negotiating power. Are there any key points or tips that you would provide to job seekers that can help them not to appear desperate, even if they're like feeling super desperate?
Yeah, yeah. I think most people feel that to some degree. You're in a position of lack, not in a position of plenty, and you
Right.
feel desperate. So if that's you, be very, very careful. I saw a LinkedIn post recently where, you know how on LinkedIn they have these green banners that say open to work?
Yes.
Those are great. Keep
Yes.
using those. But this person replaced the green banner with the pink one that said hashtag desperate. And I
Okay.
think she must be desperate because she put that out there. But that actually sabotages you in a lot of different
Yes.
ways. She's thinking that she'll be able to attract some attention with that and maybe a job offer. But here's what happens psychologically in people. Um, if I perceive that you're desperate as a recruiter, I'm immediately wondering what's wrong with you?
Right.
Why don't other companies want you? You're discarded for some reason. There must be a flaw here somewhere that I'm not seeing. And that could be completely untrue, but that's the way our human minds work. It's
Mhm.
based on a psychological concept called mimetic desire. In other words, we want what other people want. Marketing uses this all the time. And if you come across as desperate, this is working completely against you. The example that I use in my book is two different toddlers in a room full of toys. You've got 100 toys in a room. Toddler A picks up a toy. Which toy does toddler B want? Always, 100% of the time, it's the toy that toddler A has. They're not interested at all in the abandoned 99 other toys.
Yep.
So, how to deal with desperation? I think you have to build some momentum in your job search. If you're a senior level person, I'd recommend that you start a consulting firm and begin consulting, or at
Mm.
least start talking to
Yes.
people about consulting gigs. Um, you can also interview for positions that you don't particularly like. You have to keep your pipeline full, conversations happening all the time. And this way, when a recruiter calls you and says, "What's your salary requirement?" you can say, "Well, I'm interviewing with a number of other companies, and in those discussions, the total pay packages are between X and Y." Now, when you say something like that, um, you're indicating that you're in conversation with other companies, which means you're the toy that somebody else has.
Right.
You're not one of those toys that's in the corner gathering dust.
Yeah.
So you're activating mimetic desire for you instead of having it work against you. You always have to be perceived as somebody that other people want. You're in high demand because when you are, you're perceived automatically as more valuable, more interesting, more worth more. They'll want you more. Psychologically, this is a trick that I think every candidate should use.
Yes, I think that's great that you mentioned that. I am all about that, and I think what you were mentioning, several things. I love that this topic in general because
Mhm.
I think it's great in terms of salary negotiation, the for job seekers, and in life, it's interesting, just the psychology of that. I'm definitely a believer of energy and abundance, and I'm one
Yeah.
of those. I'm one of those. And yeah, so what you were saying about like the desperation being basically a state of lack versus the state of essentially versus abundance. And being able to be proactive and create that abundance, I think is amazing. And so like with the advice that you give on the job and the negotiation and a job application process of just talking, interviewing, even if it's not necessarily the exact roles a person want, but to show like, yeah, okay, I'm talking to other people and and
Yep.
this is what's on the table.
Yeah, you better act fast or somebody might take me away from you.
That's exactly right. I think that's great. That can apply
You
to
don't have
many
to say
areas.
that word for word, but if you imply,
Yes.
gently, carefully imply that, you
Yeah.
can get a lot of mileage out of this.
Yes.
Um, but whatever you do, like be aware of desperation. Try not to appear desperate, even if you're feeling that. And there are ways that you can position yourself so that the other person on the other side of this Zoom call doesn't feel the desperation. If they do, it's an invitation to a lowball offer. At best,
At
at,
best, right.
at worst, they're going to lose interest in you because maybe there's a hidden flaw that they suspect might be there.
Yes, 100%. Oh, so useful. I could talk about this topic for days in life, but I love that you mentioned that and mimetic desire. That's great. Wonderful. And so obviously as a resume writer, I'm going to ask a resume question in there. So what do
Go
you
for
feel
it.
what do you feel a job applicant's resume should include or focus on to show their value and maybe even to help increase their negotiation or salary goals?
Yeah, so there are a few things that I would suggest here. The number one thing is I think there needs to be some statements of results in the resume. And try your best to, well, think about it this way. How would your boss know that you were doing a good job?
Hmm.
Like if they had two people doing the same job and one was an average person and another was a significant high performer, what would the differences be? And imagine what those things are and make sure that you're illustrating those high performance metrics in your resume somewhere. So I think you need to see results. The other thing is you need to consider how those results affect the financials of the company. So does this result in bigger revenue, reduced expenses, the core operating financials of a department or a company? Because if you can solve a $5 million problem, you're probably worth an extra $50,000. Um,
Yes.
if you can't draw that straight line to financial value, then it's hard to position yourself as being worth more money.
Hmm.
So the other thing is imagine the most painful, difficult problems that that hiring manager in that department probably has. Is it customer turnover? Is it, I don't know, inventory issues? Is it supply chain reliability? What are the kind of things that could get your boss in that job fired if they were underperforming? Think about that stuff. And now, if you can put how you fix those problems or you maintain high levels of support in A, B, and C, that reduce the risk for your future boss. Those are huge things that I would bring into the resume. The last thing I would mention is a topic near and dear to my heart, and that is ageism.
Hmm.
And ageism is a huge problem. I've
Yeah.
seen it many times. It's one area where people are openly discriminating against older people who are further along in their career. And so I would say your resume can get in your way here. And you need a professional like you to help guide you through what should be in there, what shouldn't be in there, how it should be presented to counter the idea that you're too old, you're too slow, you're uncreative, you haven't had a new idea in 30 years or something like that, right? These and I'm just throwing out the bias that people have.
Absolutely.
They have this bias about older workers. And you need to know if you're in that category, you need to know that that's what you're competing against, and you have to be very different from that on your resume and in person. You cannot confirm this bias.
Yes.
So, and it will
Yes.
cost you money. If that's the case.
Yes, 100%. Those are, I agree with all those tips. Yes, that he gave in terms of on the resume, and I'm glad they align with, of course, like adding value and
Mhm.
allowing one to negotiate more when you do those key things, results oriented. I'm all about that. I work with my clients on that all the time and really try to elicit like, how did you make impact? Let's quantify it if possible. Like you mentioned, how does it play into the overall financials and the mission of the organization for which they're working and the organization for which they have interest in applying. So yes, those are great. And as you mentioned, unfortunately, ageism exists and how to uh, circumvent hiring manager from focusing on things related to age. So no, great tips. Absolutely. And we kind of hit on this term throughout the conversation. And you mentioned even during your time at Capital One that you had this, but what is leverage? How important is it in salary negotiation? And anything you want to say regarding leverage and how one can optimize their leverage?
Sure, sure. Leverage is critical in pay negotiation. And I'll start by saying kind of what it is and maybe what it isn't, at least from my perspective. I think some people think leverage is like I've got your arm behind your back and I'm
Yeah.
twisting it and you can feel your shoulder come out of joint and all that. That's one kind of leverage, but not what I would advise using. And I think some people think, well, I've got leverage on you. I'm going to choke you until you agree to
Yeah. Yeah.
do what I want. And that's not the way a salary negotiation should go. So the way I define leverage in this salary negotiation situation is it's a subtle shift of the balance of power.
Hmm.
So if you're in that desperate mindset, you feel like the company has all the power to walk away, to say yes, to say no. You don't have much, and you sense that. You sense the balance of power is not in your favor. The company's holding all the cards.
Hmm.
And because you sense that you don't have leverage, you you back away from pursuing the salary negotiation like you should. And so the idea of building leverage is to subtly change that balance of power to where you have more power than they have. And by the end of the process, by the time you get an offer, I mentioned this before, they want you to say yes. You have tremendous leverage at this point because they want something and you could say no. This is why it's one of the biggest mistakes that people make is to say yes immediately when the offer comes. You have a lot of leverage right now to ask for a few things, and you just throw that away if you say yes immediately. So that's my biggest tip for today is don't say yes right away, and don't don't abandon that leverage. There's a lot of ways to build leverage, and I think competition is one of the best ways. We talked about that a little bit in the discussion of mimetic desire. But if you can build a sense of competition, it's kind of like being at an auction. If you've ever been to an auction, most people have competed on eBay, but if you've ever been to a live auction and some like thing that is ugly piece of art comes up, and now all of a sudden there are three bidders, four bidders, five bidders, you suddenly start to see that piece of artwork is interesting and intriguing. What is it about this that's worth more, that's worth that much?
Absolutely.
So you can suddenly and subtly um, turn the power dynamic in your
Mm.
favor by cultivating competition along the way. And there's several ways and several times to thread that into every interaction that you have with people. And there's also buying signals. You probably are going to get a few buying signals here and there. That one I got from Chip at Capital One was the biggest buying signal I've ever had was we want to hire you.
Yeah.
But there's also a bunch of other subtle little buying signals that you'll start to hear. And when you hear these things, you know that the balance of power is shifting in your favor.
Yes.
And so I spend a lot of time helping my clients build leverage carefully and subtly, and then how to carefully and subtly use it to their favor in the pay negotiation. Not like that arm hammer lock that I talked about
Right.
before. We're not forcing them. What we're doing is guiding them into how they can uh, get you to say yes, and
Yeah.
then they will feel like they've won, and you'll feel like you've won. Everyone is happy with that outcome. That's my goal.
That's great. No, thanks. Wonderful insights there. And you mentioned earlier in the conversation too, I think about that you've used the term signing bonus. So a lot of people want signing bonuses. How would you advise that one goes about getting one?
Ah, yes. Some companies will offer signing bonuses like right up front in their job description. They'll put an ad out there and say
Oh.
$10,000 signing bonus. Usually that's to cover over or gloss over the fact that their pay plan isn't as
Mm,
great as others. But usually that's not the case. Most people do want a signing bonus, but they have no idea how to get one. And usually a signing bonus is like the Swiss Army knife of recruiting. When I was recruiting, if if I was limited on what salary I could offer, or I couldn't, let's say maybe somebody was leaving a whole bunch of stock on the table, and this happens a lot with senior executives. They will have three, four, 500,000 or more in unvested stock that they're leaving behind on the table. If they say yes to you, they have to leave that behind. Now, if you're working for a privately held company that doesn't offer stock, what can you do? Well, you have to buy them out of that somehow, maybe partially or fully, but that's a collaborative discussion to figure it out. But the signing bonus is used to close gaps in an offer. So during this Q&A process that I talked about earlier, where you get an offer, now you start asking questions, you're trying to expose gaps in the offer.
mm,
So an example might be, and this is a true story from one of my recent client negotiations. We discovered that the health insurance wasn't going to be active for 6 months through this question and answer process. When does the health insurance begin for me and my family? Well, it starts 6 months after you accept. So another question is it possible to start on day one? No, unfortunately, that's not possible. This is a policy and it applies to everyone. Okay, well, you just exposed a gap in
mm,
that offer. It's like, well, okay, if I say yes, I'm going to have to carry my own health insurance for 6 months. That's means I'm going to have to carry Cobra, and that's $1,800 a month. So, like, get out the calculator, 1,800 times six, that's $10,800 net of tax.
mm.
Taxes, by the way, are something people often ignore as well. Be careful about that.
Right.
So, a good question here is, well, I understand that you can't put me on the plan earlier, but if I say yes, I'm going to have to carry Cobra for 6 additional months. That's going to cost me $10,800. Probably it's more like 1,800 or $18,000 before tax. So would it be possible to offset that with a signing bonus?
Hmm.
Ask the question.
And then shut up.
Be quiet. And they might say it might be possible. They might say yes, or it might be we can come up with part of that. But now you've just discovered if they can create a signing bonus to offset that. But usually, here's the thing to remember, companies don't just throw signing bonuses in willy-nilly. They do it to offset a deficit, which is something like this, or maybe there's a competitive offer coming that's a little bit better. They can't match that competitive offer, but they could throw in a signing bonus to even the playing field. And you have to word these things very, very carefully. and ask if things are possible and go that direction. This is the low risk approach to discovering if a signing bonus is possible. Now, they might say, well, unfortunately, we don't do signing bonuses. Now, in that case, you just discovered that you're not leaving anything on the table there.
Hmm.
But maybe they have to adjust the offer some other place. And believe me, companies will adjust offers in a lot of different ways. They don't always make up differences in salary because of internal equity issues or other things. So you have to be creative. Signing bonuses are the number one tool in my toolkit when I'm trying to close a candidate that is a little bit off.
Hmm. Oh, great advice, great things also, as you mentioned, to be aware of with signing bonuses, the pros and the cons, and
Mhm.
and asking certain questions to see what wiggle rooms or gaps there are, and being quiet and listening.
Yeah.
Those are all great, really great tips. Now you have a book out, Act Your Wage. What's it about, and how can people find it?
Great question. Thank you. The
Great
book,
title by the name, Act
yep,
Your Wage. I love
this
that.
is what it looks like. So,
Yes.
Act Your Wage, what to say and how to say it to get the best possible pay package. It's available on Amazon, so that's the place to look for it. So search for Act Your Wage, John Gates, and you should find it right away. Right now, it's available in ebook. By the time this podcast comes out, I think the paperback will be available for order as well. But it walks you through what to say and how to say it at every step of the process, from application through phone screens, interviews, offers, counter offers, all that stuff. It's about 50% of what I would give to a coaching client at a much lower price point. But if you get stuck and you need my help, I'm always there to help you personally. You can reach out to me and I'll help you. But for most people, I think they could find a couple of key tricks here that would make them 10 or $15,000. It's an excellent resource.
Yes, and I ask you what it's about because, of course, I wanted our audience to know. But I've read the book, as you know, I've read your ebook, and I think it's really great. I really love it, appreciate it. I think it gives great tips for human beings in general, but especially for job seekers, and salary people who are interested in negotiating their salary, which I would think would be the majority of job seekers. So great tips. And honestly, even if you're not, I'm not in the market for a job, but I still found it extremely interesting to read, and just even from even just psychology, which fascinates me too, how
Yeah.
much of the process is very strategic and based on psychology.
Well, learning some of these techniques, it's learning how to negotiate your pay is something that most people never do. It's okay to be a beginner if that's you. It's really okay to be a beginner as long as you're committed to learning how to do it. It doesn't take a lot, but this is a skill that you can grow and can develop, and it will pay you for your lifetime. If you are able to get $5,000 in extra salary, that's going to pay you $5,000 every year, year after year, and it'll be compounded through your bonus, 401k matches, future raises, all of that. It's definitely a skill worth developing.
It is 100%. And lastly, what is you have a business, and what is the salary coach method, and how can it help boost job applicants' next job offer?
So I do run a business called Salary Coach. The Salary Coach method is it's the strategy and process that I've developed over the course of years negotiating with candidates and now helping candidates to get the best package safely. So it's getting through the application and getting your phone ringing. It's getting through the phone screen and being affordable enough to pass through to interviews. It's maximizing your value and your leverage during the interview process. And it's how to maximize the offer at the end safely while avoiding all those landmines and pitfalls and deadly mistakes that most people make. If you follow that process, you're going to be way ahead of everyone else. And like I said before, it's not an arm twisting exercise. You don't have to be somebody that you're not to negotiate your pay effectively. You can still be a nice person and get everything that is potentially going to be left behind. Don't let your fear rule the day. Instead, bring some knowledge to the game, know how to do these things, and you can win at this without creating a win-lose. It can be win-win. And that's the salary coach method, is how to get through it, how to get the best possible pay package without putting your job offer at risk.
Wonderful. How can people keep in touch with both you, or if they're interested in the coach method? I'm assuming you have
Mhm.
a website, anything you want to share there?
Sure. One of the best ways to get in touch with me is through the Salary Coach Academy, which is salarycoachacademy.com. There, I have a series of recorded video lessons on how to talk about pay at every single step of the process. Certainly, you can email me at john@salary.coach. Or if you want, they can come through you, Leslie. Anybody that's watching your podcast can certainly reach out to you and say, hey, how do I get in touch with John? And I'm sure that you would introduce them to me.
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. So, and right, you hear it from John, definitely reach out, check out his website, contact him, reach out to me, whatever way. I just think what you're doing is great. It's very useful. I find it extremely intriguing. And I love things with strategy and psychology and energy, and I feel like it's all related. Those very useful steps in the salary negotiation process. So that's wonderful. Is there anything before we wrap up that you'd like to say? We've had wonderful topics. I just wanted to
Sure.
open the floor if there was anything you wanted to mention before we wrap up, or any
Well,
final
thanks.
tips, I guess.
Thanks, Leslie. I would just say that salary negotiation is one of those mysteries. It's something that is everyone wants to know about, everyone's curious about, but very few people understand how to do this. I'm surprised that there's nobody else like me doing what I do as a specialty. There's a ton of career coaches out there that can walk you through the job search process and how to prepare for interviews. Some will even walk you through pay negotiations, but very few people with my level of experience and background on the other side of the table. I had somebody tell me recently, you're like the prosecutor turned defense attorney, aren't you?
Right.
Yeah, that's what I am. And I have a very strategic mind, but I'm also super intuitive. I'm good at understanding what's going on the other side of the screen, on the other side of the table. I'm good at anticipating what might happen. And so pay negotiation doesn't have to be this big mystery. I don't think it should be. And that's my mission here, is to demystify it, to help the average person get more money and do it in a way that makes the company they're interviewing with happy as well. That's all possible. So my whole coaching process is about creating the win-win. And that's exciting for me. I'm seeing great results, and hope that I'll be able to carry this forward to the next level.
Yes.
And so that's about all I'd like to say.
Absolutely. Wonderful. I had an amazing time having you on as my guest. Really useful tips. You're right. I glad we connected, as it's really unique what you're doing, and of great value. So I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and the tips and wonderful input you gave to all of our audience members and job seekers in general. So I look forward to continued conversations on and off the Zoom screen with
Thanks,
you.
Leslie. I would welcome that anytime. Like, working with you has been a joy. I feel
Oh,
like you and I are on the same page when it comes to resume writing and how it should go and the power of that document. And I met a lot of resume writers in this journey, and most of them are really, really good. You're in that top tier, so I
thank
appreciate you so
you.
much.
Well, I appreciate you appreciating me. I appreciate you as well. And yes, and what a great episode. Thank you as well to all of our viewers. I hope you enjoyed and got much value from this episode with John. And definitely stay tuned to the next episode of Ask the Hiring Manager. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Welcome to Ask the Hiring Manager. I'm Leslie Hunter, president of Resume Makeover. I've been helping job seekers for nearly a decade to acquire their dream jobs and achieve the income they desire, from entry-level applicants to C-suite executives and everyone in between. From your resume to your cover letter, LinkedIn profile, bio, or website content, I'm here for you. And now I'm going to open the door and interview some of the top hiring managers so that you can have the insight that you need to book the jobs that you want. Welcome to Ask the Hiring Manager.